Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with David Mack, who is a New York Times bestselling author of many different works. And I'm going to let you tell us exactly what those works are.
I'm the author of roughly 36 novels at this point, as well as many works of short fiction. I've also written for Star Trek on television. I've written for video games, comic books, live theater, just about everything you can think of except for feature film at this point. I've also written my own original series for Tor Books called Dark Arts, which is out now. It's a trilogy. And I'm working on some new stuff right now, as well as a new project that I can't talk about because we're still negotiating contracts and stuff, but it's going to be a fun thing coming at the end of this year.
Excellent. So what can readers expect from your newest book, which I believe is part of the trilogy?
Well, it depends. If you're talking about my most recently published, that actually came out almost a year ago. And that was back in last August of 2020. I had two books out on the same day, Tuesday, August 11th. I had a Star Trek novel called More Beautiful Than Death, and I had the third and final volume of my Dark Arts trilogy, which is called The Shadow Commission. So they both came out the same day, which made promotion lots of fun. And I guess if you were to ask what was the Star Trek book about, it's based on the most recent incarnation of Star Trek in the movies, the J.J. Abrams film starring Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, et cetera, et cetera. So it's based on that version of Star Trek, its events, its history, its characterizations, its voices, as opposed to those of the original series of the 60s. The two are very different in terms of tone, pacing, and now the characters' backstories and histories have also very much changed over the course of three movies from what they were in the original film. So that's what More Beautiful Than Death is. And The Shadow Commission is basically a work of paranoid conspiracy thriller with black magic. It was inspired by movies like 3 Days of the Condor. So where you essentially, when you don't know who to trust, things like Marathon Man, the conspiracy thrillers of the 70s was really where I drew inspiration for The Shadow Commission. And it takes place starting on the day of the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963 and takes place roughly over 1 week of time following that. And the idea is basically that our heroes, who are magicians, find that somebody is targeting the world's magicians and is assassinating them with cold, ruthless, methodical efficiency. And if they don't figure out who's doing it and why, they won't be able to fight back. So it's a race against time to figure out who your enemy is and then how to fight that enemy.
Okay, and what were the steps that you took to bring that from initial inspiration to the finished book?
Well, The Shadow Commission was something that had been gestating in my head for a long time. The Dark Arts series was something I developed over the course of roughly 5 to 7 years. It started with The Midnight Front, which was a World War II war epic with black magic. And what was the chief inspiration for Dark Arts was a book published, I believe, in 1968, a year before I was born, which I read as a teenager, called Black Easter by James Blish. Many people know of James Blish as the guy who wrote the episode novelizations of Star Trek and the Star Trek logs, which were based on the animated series. But he was also a very accomplished writer of original fiction, award-nominated, award-winning author. And his book Black Easter was part of a trilogy that he called After Such Knowledge. And Black Easter is very simply this very cold clinical book about what if black magic worked exactly the way the old grimoires of the Renaissance era said it does. How would black magic fit into the modern world? And so the story revolves around a jaded arms dealer who hires a black magician to release all the demons of hell for one night with no instructions and no restrictions. And essentially it's the negotiation, the push and pull between them, and then the consequences of what happens when their experiment inevitably goes awry. So I always loved that book since I was a teenager. It haunted me, especially the ending. And I thought, if I ever get to do something with magic, with fantasy, I really want to work with that. That was what inspired me. So I finally got that opportunity with Dark Arts at Tor Books, where I developed the series and I developed the system of magic based on Renaissance era black magic, and then working from some advice that was given to me by my friend Aaron Rosenberg, who was a game designer as well as a prolific author. He suggested that I add some elements to make it a little more cinematic, but also to help define the powers a little more clearly. So I did that, and that made the magic system a little bit more visual and exciting than it was in Blish's book. And that was pretty much how it started. And I found that the World War II era was just the most intriguing way to explore it. I wanted to basically set the different books of dark arts in different eras of world geopolitical history. World War II just seemed like the best place to start. The second book, Iron Codex, is a Cold War spy thriller in the style of Ian Fleming or John le Carre. It's almost like a Bond movie, but with black magic. And it's set in 1954. And it deals with the fusion or the intersection of black magic and the Bikini Atoll fusion bomb test by the United States, when we detonated pretty much the largest surface detonation of a hydrogen bomb on the face of the earth. So it's basically what happens when black magic meets atomic science. So that was the idea behind dark arts, was to see what's happening behind the scenes of real history, to posit that there was this crazy black magic angle to things that we didn't know about. It's not really alt history, because I'm not changing the events of history. It's more what's known as secret history or shadow history. It's the idea that there was a history behind the history. There were things that we were not privileged to know that affected the outcome of events as we saw them.
So what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
I think it's the sense that there must be more to the world than what we see. It's a desire maybe to think that the world is not as mundane or as banal as we are, forced to accept it as adults, but that maybe there really is something greater, more fantastical going on behind the scenes. While I myself, tend to be very much grounded as a realist, I do have some sort of, feelings of spirituality, but I wouldn't exactly call it religion. So I don't believe in the things that I'm writing in the Dark Arts trilogy. It's based in, like I said, Renaissance era black magic, which is tied heavily into Catholic mythology and Catholic iconography of the 15th and 16th century. Not really my bag, but I love the visuals of it. I was raised Catholic, so I guess maybe it triggers something in the back of my head, some atavistic, childhood memory that will just not go away. But I think that there is a sense of secret history or alt history that people want to believe, what if the world had gone just a little bit differently? Or what if there was more to that than we were told? There's always been the joke about the Kennedy and the magic bullet, because they claim that it came in and then turned at a right angle, which of course is ridiculous. If you actually look at the real history, what happened was that people didn't understand that the car he was riding in had been modified. The rear seat had been elevated for the VIP to wave at the crowds, which is why there was a different angle. There was no right angle turn. It was just the design of the car, but a lot of people didn't know that, so they made crazy assumptions. But I took that joke of the magic bullet, and I have, a scene in, the opening, one of the opening bits in Shadow Commission is that the assassination of Kennedy really did depend on a magic bullet, because he was surrounded by layers of magical defense. It took a magic bullet to hit him. So that's sort of like a little inside joke to all the people who were conspiracy theorists about Kennedy and joking about the magic bullet. Well, there really was one. It just didn't do what you think it did.
So what kinds of research went into writing A Shadow Conspiracy?
Shadow Commission.
Commission, yes.
Sorry. It took so much research. All of the books really did. The first one, The Midnight Front, I spent a couple of years researching that. I had to learn all sorts of things about World War II. I thought I knew World War II. I didn't know World War II. I knew the fundamental top level basics of World War II. I didn't know the nitty gritty of World War II until I researched this book. And it wasn't just book reading. I dug up things like schematics of the German bunkers that are at Pointe du Hoc and throughout Normandy. I went to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans and studied up close and personal things like the weapons. They allowed me to touch the uniforms, the old equipment, to get the weight of the rifle. I got to see, I really just, I immersed myself in all that sort of history. Plus, there's lots of Freedom of Information documents out now about World War II that were classified at the time. but are now just public information made available by the Department of Defense. So for instance, in my D-Day landing sequence near the end of Midnight Front, I described the character as being, originally with 2nd Rangers, but then being redetailed to 5th Rangers, or maybe the other way around. And then what ship he was on as they approached Normandy, where the ship landed, who was commanding which boat, what the numbers were on the PT boats. If someone were to go and look that up, it's all correct. I actually worked from the real records of the numbers on the Higgins boats, which are those flat-bottom troop boats. I made sure I had the right numbers on the right boats. I made sure I named the right lieutenant for the boats that hit the beach first. It was Lieutenant Legans. So I made sure I had the right lieutenants hitting the beach first, so that if someone were to go in and start saying, well, did that really happen? They'd find out, yeah, that's exactly what happened. There's one crazy bit in the D-Day sequence of a sergeant who, while his men are trying to get up the cliff at Pointe du Hoc, he basically takes his vehicle. They called them ducks. They were supposed to be trucks with ladders from the Metropolitan Fire Department of London. And the idea was they were supposed to go ashore, put the ladders up to the cliffs, and rapidly scale the cliffs. Well, it didn't work because the shelling the night before had knocked all this loose rock and sand off the front of the cliffs. It had formed a muddy slope in front of the cliffs, and they couldn't get ashore. They all just got stuck. So they're stuck in the rising surf, and they're basically swaying back and forth, which at the top of the ladder is making it do this. Well, this sergeant climbs this ladder, which is at the same height as the German snipers up on the top of the cliff. He's swaying back and forth, spraying them with machine gun fire as he's riding this thing back and forth. Sounds crazy. Really happened. And that's the reason our guys got up those ropes and climbed those cliffs. There was one guy crazy enough to stand at the top of this ladder that's swinging like a metronome and strafe the enemy. So I found out all kinds of details like that about book 1. Then in book 2, I had to research the period of 1954. I had to know the cars, the music, the hairstyles. I needed to know what airlines actually flew to what places. I needed to know if you could get on commercial airlines from certain places to certain places. Some you couldn't. I needed to know what trains were running at that time. I needed to know which countries were on which currencies. All sorts of things. I looked into things like the history of escaped Nazi war criminals, where they settled in South America, how the networks that they formed, how they got support from the old country, how they got support through the Vatican and the Catholic Church. So I had that level of research on book 2. Then I come to book 3. Now I'm researching the Kennedy assassination. You ever want to go down a rabbit hole of tons of tiny little details? Look into the Kennedy assassination. And in particular, not just the Kennedy assassination, but then the subsequent assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald in the parking lot by Jack Ruby in the underground parking garage. There's a whole different set of conspiracies and a whole bunch more detail you have to learn about that. And I had to get that right down to the minute. So fortunately, I have a friend who is kind of an expert in the Kennedy assassination. It's been one of his lifelong obsessions. He knows all sorts of stuff about it. So after I'd written the scenes, after I'd done all my research and I thought I had it right, he actually went through with the Zapruder film, frame by frame, comparing its events at increments of 1/18 of a second to the increment, to the scene, to the the moments happening in my scene. He says, discrepancy here. This person shouldn't be here yet. This person would be over here. And so I had to rewrite chunks of that scene based on his frame by frame analysis of the moment. But again, all the little details like what cell Harvey Oswald was in while he was being held by the Dallas PD, what floor, what the layout of the prison was in the central jail. All those details are spot on. And it's crazy the level of research when you go into historical fiction, because if you're writing alt fiction, alt history, you're allowed to fudge it a little bit. I mean, you want to know where things really started, but then you can say, well, and here's where the divergence occurs. And you can write off a lot of things to divergence. When you're doing secret history, you are beholden to get the details right. And that makes the job a little bit harder.
So did you actually have to do all the research before you started writing?
Yeah, I needed to know what was going on in the real world. I often would find that ideas that I had for where I thought the story would go didn't work because they grossly contradicted what was really happening, and there was no way to reconcile the two. So what I started out doing for each book was I made timelines, month by month, sometimes week by week, of what was going on around the world, what were major events, things that I can call upon, things that I can tie into the story. For instance, in book 2, there's a sequence in which a character, in order to make some money and get whatever, uses a demon to crash a passenger airliner that's flying out of Rome, and basically crashes it into the Tyrrhenian Sea. I based that on a real air disaster that actually happened on that date. I basically
Wow.
found this event and I said, that I can work into the story, because it was exactly the kind of disaster that a demon would engineer. No survivors, barely any wreckage found. And there goes the fire department. Off on yet another adventure. So yeah, lots of little bits of research like that, but I would basically figure out what was happening in the world, and then try to build the story from there.
Wow. What was the biggest challenge in writing and putting out the latest book, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Uh, I don't know that there was any particular greater challenge on the Shadow Commission than there was on any of the other books in Dark Arts. But if I were to switch gears and go to the Star Trek book, More
Okay.
Beautiful Than Death, the challenge with that one is that I actually wrote it a decade ago. It was originally contracted for by the publisher in 2010. What ended up happening was that at the time, the publisher had the right to do the books, but there was some push and pull behind the scenes, some political, stuff going on between the studio, the publisher, and the licensor, because the movie franchise was just getting started and they weren't sure yet where they were going to go for the second movie or the third movie, or when they were going to get to them. And one of the concerns by the producers on the film side at Bad Robot under J.J. Abrams was, what if we start establishing all of these details about the characters and the universe and the things that happen after the first movie, and they decide that they want to go a totally different way. Now, sure, they can overwrite us and not think twice, but they were more concerned about presenting a consistent image of their version of Star Trek. They didn't want us presenting our version of their version of Star Trek. They wanted to keep their version under their control. They found it was easier to do with comic books because they had one of their own people writing them. And comic books are shorter and they happen on a much faster time frame, so you can review them and turn them around faster. Novels are a lot of work. They take a lot of time to read. There's tons of little details you've got to track. So what they found was they weren't going to be able to do it to their satisfaction. And the publisher respected their right to say, we would prefer not to have you guys contradicting what we might do in the future. So they took these 4 books that they had commissioned, Time 54 books, and just said, well, I guess they'll never see the light of day. And they pulled them off the schedule and put them on a shelf. Now, the interesting thing was, for those of us who had written them, it was myself, Greg Cox, Christopher L. Bennett, and only one of the all-time great writers, the guy who wrote Alan Dean Foster, the guy who wrote Splinter of the Mind's Eye, among many other things, and also the movie novelizations for the recent Star Trek movies. We had written these 4 books. We'd all been paid. We'd all gotten our advances. We got our signing payments. We got our outline payments. We got our manuscript payments. We were all in various stages of editing and production, getting ready to bring these books out when they got canceled. So we all got to keep our money. We had done our job. None of us got screwed. None of us got treated poorly. We were treated fairly. We got our money. We just didn't see the book come out. So years go by. I have long since stopped thinking this book will ever see the light of day. I count it as written, but I just leave it off the CV. And then one day I get a call from the editors because of various scheduling problems. They've had a lot of gaps appear in the schedule. They have to fill them rapidly. They're going to pull this book off the shelf because now they have permission from the Bad Robot guys. They've done their 3 movies. They have no idea for a 4th. They say, fine, as long as the book fits somewhere between 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, go, have fun, publish your books. So suddenly they pull my book off the shelf and they say, can you re-edit this and bring it up to standard? I'll try my best. And I look at this book I'd written a decade ago. I go, wow, I would not write that book that way today. So I start re-editing and rewriting and polishing it up. And finally we get it out there. And that was the biggest challenge, was taking this book that I had written a decade earlier and basically retroactively editing and rewriting it so that it feels like my current style of writing, not the style I had 10 years ago. So that was a fun challenge to have, basically resurrecting a book that had been on a shelf for a decade.
Wow. Yeah, I would imagine that would be a challenge.
Certainly caught me looking. I was like, "You want me to do what? All right,
So,
done."
so what character did you love or hate the most when writing? And that could be from either book.
Well, in the Shadow Commission, you would think that I would love most like one of my main characters, either Cade Martin or Anya Karnova. But I have to say it was Briette Segfin's daughter. She started out as a supporting character, but she very much came into her own over the course of the second and third books of the series. She went from sort of, the villain's right hand gal in book one, but she eventually turns against him and abandons him and goes off on her own to save herself. And then she starts evolving and becoming more nuanced, more complex, and to the point where she actually got some pretty good lines and moments that you would have thought might have occurred between Cade and Anya, since he's married to Anya in book three. But instead, there's moments where he's connecting with Briette because he and Briette have been through similar levels of loss and trauma at that point. Briette is actually in a better headspace to talk to him about the things he's experiencing because she's just gone through them herself. So I found that Briette, this character who was just meant to be a supporting player, surprised me. She just came to the fore, so that by the end of book three, she is on a par with Cade and Anya. It's really Cade, Anya, and Briette. And a character who I really loved in book two, there just wasn't enough room to do more with him in book three, and that was Father Luis Rodrigo Perez. He's a white magician who ends up becoming a gray magician. That's a whole other story. I love what I did with him in book two, but I wish I could have done more with him in book three, but Briette just stole the show.
Do you find that happens sometimes, that the characters kind of determine the direction of the story?
Yeah, I find sometimes as I'm writing a story, whether it's a Star Trek novel or an original novel, some supporting player who I didn't think was going to be the most colorful character on the page suddenly just starts stealing scenes. And I have to feel like that's probably some expression of my subconscious. There's something in there that finds that it gravitates to this character for some reason. This character is the best mouthpiece for whatever it is my subconscious desperately knows needs to get on the page. And so suddenly I just end up investing in this character. And it's a little weird when that happens in a tie-in book, like a Star Trek book, because you have to keep certain characters on the straight and narrow. They have a certain way of speaking, they have a point of view, they have an established history and an ethos and a viewpoint. So you can't go too far afield with the established characters. So sometimes you wind up specifically creating a new original character or pulling a supporting character from way back in the deep recesses of the series history that if you mess with it a little bit, who's going to know or who's going to be able to gainsay you? And then you find that character just suddenly is like walking around like the proverbial guy with the bass drum on his back and the cymbals and the horn. Look at me, look at me. That happens.
Right. So what else can we expect from you in the future?
Probably lots of snarky tweets and angry tweets about politics. Probably a few stories of drunken revels in hotel bars if we ever have conventions again. More seriously, what I have coming up at the end of this year is the third book in the Star Trek Coda trilogy. And the story behind that is that for the last 20 years or so, those of us who write the Star Trek novels, many of us have been working with a shared literary continuity, where we took the characters and the events of the Star Trek universe as they existed at the end of the movie Star Trek Nemesis, which in the Star Trek calendar is set in 2379. And we started carrying events forward, starting in about 2001, 2002, which is when Nemesis came out. When it became clear that Star Trek Enterprise wasn't going to be getting past the fourth season, that there weren't likely to be any more feature films for a while after Nemesis, and that if there were, it probably wasn't going to be the Next Gen or any of the TV crews anymore. We figured, well, that's probably the last we've seen of these characters on screen. Maybe we should ask for the freedom to carry their lives forward Because it used to be when you wrote books about a show that was still on TV or maybe still had the possibility to show up in movies, you had to be very careful to respect the status quo. You could introduce minor incremental moments of change or insight, but you couldn't fundamentally alter the details of a character's life or their key relationships. You couldn't suddenly marry two characters off or give them a kid or kill somebody off. You had to sort of put the toys back in the box where you got them. Maybe a little scuffed, but basically the same as you found them. Once we figured, oh, well, all bets are off. The shows are done. The movies are done. Nobody's playing with these toys anymore. Can we start breaking the toys? And they said, all right, tell you what, take your best shot, break the toys. So we started breaking toys and changing the state of the universe. We'd blow up a ship, we'd kill a character, we'd marry off Picard and Beverly, and they use a little bit of 24th century, medical mumbo jumbo to get themselves a kid. Troy and Riker go off to the Titan. We create a whole Star Trek Titan series. We create a whole thing. I figure out a way to bring back Data that I think is, probably the best possible answer to that question, and so on. And so these characters' lives, they grow, they change. We do all these interlocking series. We do stuff set in the original series era that still connects to this new expanded 24th century thing. And we've just been doing this for 20 years, creating this complex, layered tapestry of dozens upon dozens of books by, a few dozen authors that just tie together. We respect the details of each other's books. We build on each other's events. The editors coordinate with us. We coordinate with each other. So there's been this shared literary universe for 20 years now. Along comes Star Trek Picard. There goes your continuity. Suddenly, this character who we thought was never going to be seen on screen again is back. And he's brought Riker and Troy with him. And there's Starfleet. And suddenly the Borg, who, I made go away in Star Trek Destiny. I finished them off. Well, not anymore. There they are. So suddenly we realized that Picard, within, its first 2 or 3 episodes, has established a series of facts tied to specific dates in the chronology of the backstory of the series that go back to roughly the era in which we're telling stories that just do not fit with anything we've done. And there's no way to reconcile it. There's no way we can go back and tweak a few things and now make our stuff compatible with that stuff. It's not going to happen. So we said, what do we do? Well, when this happened to Star Wars a few years ago, when the new movie started coming out, the new Skywalker trilogy, they had all these books sort of set post Return of the Jedi that had made all these other assumptions that were now being thrown out. Star Wars rebranded basically all of those books as Star Wars Legends and started over with the new continuity that ties into the new movies. The problem was that they had ongoing storylines that just no resolution, no more books, no one's ever going to finish telling those stories. We didn't want that to happen to the 20-year work that we've been creating. We felt like readers had been taking this 20-year journey with us. They're going to feel cheated if it all just suddenly comes to a halt with no resolution, no answers. So starting a couple of years ago, when we saw this train coming at us, I talked with Dayton Ward, and we got together and talked with James Swallow, fellow author. The 3 of us have worked together before, and we agreed. And so we should come up with an epic ending to this shared adventure of 20 years, something that at least makes a nod to all of the different literary original series that have been created, that have intertwined, try to tie off as many of the storylines as we can. We coordinated with Kirsten Beyer, co-creator of Star Trek Picard, but also the author of many of the most popular recent Voyager novels. She decided she wanted to finish her Voyager storyline on her own, separate from our trilogy. And there were a few other things that wanted to get wrapped up on our own. But for the most part, we said, let's wrap these things up in a nice bow and have it come to an ending that respects the 20 years we've put in, but also respects that we have to tie off our storyline to make room for the new storyline. And so we conceived of this epic, crazy idea called Star Trek Coda. And eventually the editors approved it, and Star Trek office approved it. It's written. We're in editing right now. It starts coming out in September, I believe September 28th, if I remember correctly, is the release date for book 1, Moments Asunder by Dayton Ward. October 12th, we'll see the arrival of book 2, The Ashes of Tomorrow by James Swallow. And November 30 will bring the finale, the conclusion of the trilogy, and the end of this 20-plus year literary experiment. My book is called Oblivion's Gate. And so that'll be out November 30th. That's the big project I have coming up on the book side. And then, as I said, I'm working on a new project. It's going to be happening mostly in Europe. I can say that. It is Star Trek related, but again, I can't say how. It's going to be a lot of fun for me. It's going to be something unlike anything I've done before for Star Trek. And I really look forward to being able to tell people more about it one of these days once the contracts are all signed.
Wow, that sounds exciting.
It's something.
Okay, now I have some questions for you about being a writer.
Sure.
What's your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
I like living on my own schedule. A lot of times I sleep until noon or later if the desire strikes me. I stay up till 4 in the morning. I like living on my own schedule. I was never good at being a corporate monkey. Publishing process, it's kind of excruciating, to be perfectly honest. I always hate the act of writing until it clicks into gear. I always love having written. I always want to be in the state of having written. The problem is, to get there, you must first be in the state of am writing. And that state sucks. It's like rip open your brain, tear open your heart, bleed and cry onto the page and hope that it turns into words, which is why I drink when I write. I follow the Hemingway model. I write drunk and I edit sober.
That makes sense.
That's the other reason the writing worked out for me as a career is, again, it's one of the few professions in which not only are you your own boss, but you can be a high-functioning alcoholic and nobody cares. I mean, I like to say, I complain, I'm incorporated, I'm my own boss. That means I'm also my own employee. I have the worst employee in the world. He's always late. He's always drunk. He's lazy. He's always got an excuse for why his job isn't done. I can't rely on this guy at all, but he's all I got. So I can't fire him. So, upsides and downsides.
So what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome that?
Well, it's always getting started for me. There's this anxiety, this terror of looking at the blank page and realizing I need to put words on that thing. That hurts. So what I have taken to doing over the years is I prepare my manuscript template before I start writing. I template out the novel. I break it down. I got my title pages, my forward material, my back material. And what I do is I set up a bunch of sample chapter start pages with a chapter number, and then I format my opening paragraphs and my scene breaks so I have them ready to go and I can just copy and paste them. But then what I do is I put in a paragraph of motivational copy, something that will inspire me to write, so that instead of looking at a blank page, I'm looking at a challenge I've given myself. I'll write things like, here is where you're going to write, some kind of cool, fresh sentence that's going to be so awesome, it's going to blow their mind, like a York peppermint patty fired from a shotgun. Now, stop staring at this sentence and get to work and write something cool. And so I put that on the page, and now that's there. So instead of a blank page, I now have me telling myself, stop feeling sorry for yourself and put something on the damn page. It's stupid, but the motivational paragraph for me has been a lifesaver.
And it works.
It works. At the very least, I'm not looking at an empty page. At least I've got my formatting sorted out, and I've given myself a motivational message. I put in things like, remember to use the indent command and not tabs. In the age of desktop layout, that's only the devil would put tabs into a Word document that has to go to a desktop publishing unit. Even I'm not that cruel. So I leave myself little messages like that.
So you don't use anything like Scrivener?
I use Scrivener on my original works for planning. I find what I like best about Scrivener is the way you can take lots of different kinds of research, images, tables, scraps of text, all that kind of stuff, and keep it in one place where you kind of got a project folder where it all lives together and you can see all of it within that context. But when it comes time to actually write a manuscript, I work in Microsoft Word.
That makes sense. Okay. Um, what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Hmm. No, I, but in terms of what, like real life or the adventures I've written?
No, in real life.
I try not to have adventures. Adventures, that's how people get hurt. People get killed. Who needs that? See, I love to write about adventures. I don't actually want to have adventures.
Some
I'm
fun
actually a quiet.
things.
I'm a quiet guy. I like to stay at home with my cats. Eventually, I'd like to retire somewhere and just have cute little soft bunny rabbits. This is all I really want. I
Some
don't
fun.
like fast cars. I don't want to climb mountains. I don't want to jump out of airplanes. I don't want to scuba dive. People die doing these things. Everest? Okay, I can see it from over here. Yes, it's very tall. It's very nice. I don't need to climb it. People die doing that. I'll stay at the cafe. I'll have a donut. I'll have a beignet and a latte. That's more my speed.
Just some
But
fun things that have happened.
fun things have happened. Well, I mean, if I really go back into the deep past, let me think here. I started out in my 20s, actually, even before that, when I was in college. I went to NYU Film School, and I spent some summers working as a production assistant, and even lower than that, the parking production assistant on some feature films. And a parking PA is essentially a minimum wage paid kid, usually, who gets sent out 1 or 2 nights ahead of the anticipated arrival of the production unit, usually into a bad part of town in the middle of the night. And your job is to secure a certain area of this many blocks by this many blocks, these streets between here and here. And as cars leave, you're supposed to put down orange cones and tape and signs so that eventually, by the time the film crew arrives, these streets have been all blocked off, all the parking has been blocked off, so that you can park the Winnebagos and you can park the lighting trucks and the electrical trucks and the all the gear. So it's all got places to park, and all the actors Winnebagos have places to park. The problem is in New York City, when you start telling people in the middle of the night that they can't park their car, they get very angry with you. And especially when you're just a kid, you have no badge, there's really no crew, and you're all alone out here in the middle of Coney Island, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly you realize you're talking to a bunch of people who could kill you. Well, I said, all right, this is going to take a little more imagination. So I started carrying a set of nunchucks, and when threatened, I sort of did the little figure-8 thing, and I accidentally smashed out somebody's window. I didn't mean to do that, but it was very dramatic, and they all ran like hell once I did it. Then a little bit later that evening, as a couple of our people were getting Chinese food, apparently there were gunshots fired, and shots were fired into the restaurant. And I said, all right, that's it. We're taking fire. I declare this evening over. This is echo-based, all echo units. Everybody get back to the truck. We're done. To hell with it. So we had little moments like that, and then I got yelled at by the production coordinator the next day. Where are all my parking spaces? Well, I'm sorry, I wasn't paid to take fire. If I'd known I was taking Normandy Beach, if I'd known I was going to Omaha Beach, I would have negotiated for better than minimum wage. Sorry. So I had little adventures like that. I think of some of the other mishaps I've been in. Problem is, they don't really relate to writing. Like that relates at least to film work. Most of the adventures I've had are just the result of being young and stupid. Those days are fortunately long behind me. Mouthing off to drunken sailors during Fleet Week. Just typical mistakes of youth.
Okay. I'd say that's good enough. So, what is the greatest lesson you've learned thus far in your writing career?
Always get the contract signed before you start delivering work. Make sure that the contract protects your interest and not just somebody else's interest. That's important. If there's any possible way the publisher can screw you, they will. Your publisher, although they like to talk a good game about how you're going to have this great promotional relationship, yada, 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 you got to remember at the end of the day, your publisher is not your friend. They are a business entity to whom you license content in exchange for the fact that you hope they will do a better job of getting it into stores and sold into customers' hands than you will. But there's no guarantee of that. And if at any point the publisher figures out that they can do, they can either save money or lose less money by throwing you to the wolves, they will. Your publisher is not your friend. They are your business partner, but they are not your friend.
Okay. What piece of advice, aside from maybe that, would you want to share with other writers?
Marry well. Marry for money if you can. At the very least, marry somebody with a steady job and health insurance that they can put you on as a dependent. It sounds facetious, but I'm deadly serious. Seriously, marry someone who is not in the same field as you. Find somebody in a really steady field, preferably one that can't be easily outsourced. Like, don't marry somebody who's on a production line where eventually they'll be replaced by a robot. Now, you want somebody who's in medicine, or you want a garage mechanic, because they say they'll make robots fix cars, but they really can't. You actually need a human being on a lot of these things. So you want to find somebody with a job that can't just be sent to India with a phone call. So you want a garage mechanic, you want a plumber, you want a carpenter, like somebody you can't live without. Like, you can't live without a plumber. There's a reason plumbers get $200 an hour, because nobody wants to do that, and you can't get a robot to do it. So marry a plumber, marry a doctor, marry a lawyer, someone with real income and insurance.
Good idea. Are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that have helped you in your career?
Did it help me? Not really. But I am told that there is some benefit to belonging to these organizations, in particular if you want to be involved in the community and make friends and meet your peers, and also be involved in things like nominating for awards and voting for awards that are given by certain organizations. You should find out which organizations serve the genres you want to work in. If you're interested in the science fiction and fantasy side of things, you probably would do well to join SFWA, Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. If you're going to write thrillers, spy thrillers, any kind of thrillers, join the International Thriller Writers, ITW. They're a pretty good organization. There's the Mystery Writers of America. They're pretty good. And so on and so forth. And a lot of them have their own awards that they handle internally. So as for how useful these organizations are, I don't know. I know that some people have found great benefit, especially with SFWA. They have an organization within the organization called Writers Beware, or Writer Beware, and it has saved many a writer from being scammed. And I imagine other organizations have similar entities within them. SFWA also has, I believe, a legal arm that helps provide legal counsel to writers who are members of the organization who need it. They have a medical fund for emergencies. They're working on putting together insurance. So as these organizations continue to grow and evolve and gain new capabilities, I think that organizations like SFWA and ITW and Mystery Writers, et cetera, will become more and more important to join, especially if the laws change. I know there's a law going through Congress that would allow freelancers and independent contractors, such as novelists and story writers, to unionize, in which case that would give organizations like SFWA a lot more power. But I would say just join SFWA for the sake of being part of the community. It's a great way to at least, interact with your peers and people who could act as mentors. There's a mentorship program at SFWA, which I've actually participated in as a mentor, sharing advice and experience about everything from the creative side of the business to the business side of the business. Things like incorporating, how to set up bank accounts for your corporation, how to keep track of your funds, things like that. So yeah, I would say definitely look into industry organizations that serve your genre.
Great. Now I have questions for you about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
I'm a big softie. I'm always going to be the guy who cries at the movie. Yeah. Just a big old bunny man, when I tell my wife.
Okay.
Our house is shade upon. It started years ago. She bought me this bunny. It was around Easter time, and for some reason I picked up this plush bunny off a shelf at the Duane Reade drugstore, and it was just this little golden bunny with this cipher of a face, and I was fascinated by it. She said, "Do you want the bunny?" And I'm like, "Can I have a bunny?" She goes, "You can have the bunny." I go, "Well, I don't know. You say we have too many stuffed animals." She said, "That's it. I'm buying you the bunny." As I told a therapist years later, my therapist calls the bunny a transitional object. I call my wife calls it the best $8 she ever spent, and I call him Mr. Bunny.
Okay.
I'm a big old bunny.
What question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
There's never a question I wish to be asked. Most writers don't like answering questions.
So so the question would be, don't ask me any questions.
Something like that. I mean, what do I wish they would ask? What should we look for in your work in terms of Easter eggs? Well, Rush references. I think there's probably always a reference to Rush somewhere in everything I've written, either a lyric or a song title that has been deftly woven into a sentence or a line of dialogue or a chapter title or something of that nature. So, if you're ever wondering, what Easter eggs to look for in my work, always Rush.
Okay. What is or are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time for your non-writing hobbies and things that you love?
Passions include things like soundtracks for movies and TV. I love soundtracks. I love movie scores. I have since I was a kid. I think when I was around 9 or 10 years old, I forget who gave it to me, but somebody, either at my request or maybe just out of the blue, gave me the John Williams two disc set of the Star Wars soundtrack, and I just fell in love with it. And I found, even at a young age, while listening to music that I knew came from Star Wars, from a story I knew very well, that I could listen to this music and in my mind, I could compose and orchestrate new scenes, new adventures, that the music would take me to places where I could imagine new things. And I found that the music was a great way to keep my head in a certain emotional state. You want action or chase music when you're trying to think of that sort of event. You want moody music when you're trying to come up with something tense, like a thriller. You want sad music. You want, when you want to write a moment of tragedy. So I fell in love with soundtracks at a young age, started collecting them. Even when I was in junior high and high school, all through college. Now I have several hundred, mostly on disc. And I have music for every occasion when I write. So my passion is definitely, I'm an audiophile. I like, especially the high fidelity, high quality products. I like to interact with musicians, even though I have no musical talent of my own. I love to talk to composers. I love to talk to players. I've had some nice interactions on Twitter with a composer named Lauren Balfe, who did the music for Mission Impossible Fallout, as well as his Dark Materials series on HBO. And that is some of the greatest music I've ever heard, is the work he's done for Fallout and his Dark Materials. Those sets of CDs, it's 4 CDs so far for Dark Materials and then the Fallout soundtrack. Those have provided most of the imagination fuel for me on the Coda book I just wrote. And I'd interacted with him, and he gave me like a special link when I told him I was looking forward to the new Dark Materials release. And instead of giving me the link to the regular retail version, he shared with me the really high resolution, like the 24-bit uncompressed studio masters. I was like, wow. I love those. I listen to those nonstop, headphones. I love music of all kinds. I love jazz. And again, all kinds. I love New Orleans jazz. I love Chicago jazz. I love New York jazz. I love the old big band jazz, the swing jazz, the experimental stuff, everything from Miles Davis, John Coltrane. But I also love Gene Harris, Junior Mance. I like Ella Fitzgerald, Don Hampton, Sarah Vaughan. There's all these great players, Nina Simone. So I have, and then I'm also into like prog rock. I love Rush. I love classic rock. I love blues, and so on and so forth. So my passion, I guess, is music. And then hobbies. I like to cook. I was trained as a cook when I was young. I worked in restaurants for about 6 years through high school and college. That's how I got most of my money, paid most of my bills at that time. Started out as a dishwasher, and then I was a line cook. Then I was an ice cream scoop guy at Friendly's. I was a steak chef for a while at a place called York Steakhouse. I was a bartender. I was a prep cook, a sous chef. I made New York style pizza. I made Chicago deep dish pizza. There's just about everything you can think of in a kitchen except sushi. I'm not trained for sushi, but I've done just about everything else. And at one point, between my junior and senior year of college, I was an assistant chef at a little restaurant in Northampton, Massachusetts called Bistro on Main. It's the kind of place where we made our own mayonnaise from scratch, made our own garlic aioli, baked our own bread, made our own dough for the plazzettas, the little pizza things that we made. My job there as assistant chef was I would come in Monday through Friday, 8 in the morning, supervise the setup, the prep, work with the prep cooks, prep the kitchen, stock the kitchen, get all the stuff made that we needed for the day, do an inventory, run the day shift, cook for lunch, shut down after lunch at about 2, and then supervise the kitchen cleanup, the restock, do a final inventory. And then at 5 o'clock, Cynthia, the head chef, would come in. I would hand off the kitchen. I'd say, we're stocked. This is ready to go. This is tonight's special. This is all thawed. We're running out of this. We need to order this. And so called in sick tomorrow, so we need to get this person to cover. Kitchen is yours. And I'd hand off, and I'd walk out the door at 5 o'clock every night. Didn't work dinner shift. My job was run the kitchen during the day, hand off to Cynthia at night, and go out the door. So I had my nights and my weekends free all summer. I'd never had that before with a summer job. I was always working nights and weekends and service jobs. Suddenly I'm an assistant chef, and it's a day job. It was beautiful. It was the best summer job I ever had in my whole life. I don't want to ever cook professionally again because I think that would take the fun out of it, but I still love working in the kitchen. I love helping out a friend of mine named Dave, who is also a chef. I sometimes will provide a little extra helping hand for him. But what I really love is cooking with my wife. She and I are a good team in the kitchen. We always have been, even without practice or rehearsal. Like when we were first dating, within a few months of getting together, we ended up making a Thanksgiving dinner for her parents and her sister in her little tiny shoebox of a basement apartment in Queens with an even tinier closet-sized kitchen. And somehow, even with those constraints, we still managed to make a pretty nice Thanksgiving dinner, working around each other in extremely close quarters without losing our minds or killing each other. About a year or two later, her mom said, watching the two of you cook that night was when we knew you were getting married. And so we knew it when we saw you cook together. We knew. And they were right. And to this day, my wife and I are a wonderful team in the kitchen. I love making stuff with her. And then our other hobby that we do together with some of our friends is we make wine. We get the grapes from California or South America or Italy or wherever. And you do the crush and you make the juice. You add the yeast. You let them ferment and steal for a little bit. You transfer them to wooden casks. You watch the maturation. You clean them up every now and then eventually you bottle them. And my role in the group is I make the labels. Sometimes I come up with the name. Sometimes other people come up with a name. We find funny pun names. Like we made a Cote de Rhone style wine. We called it Born to Rhone. And then we put like a mock-up of the Springsteen album cover on the label. Then we had the Twilight Rhone. So I did the Twilight Zone style, black and white with the Twilight Zone style logo, but it says Twilight Rhone. It's a little TV screen. So things like that. We come up with joke names. We're making a Montepulciano. We're calling it the Full Monty. And it's got a picture of Michelangelo's David, but he's wearing the construction boots like the guys in the movie. So that's what I do. Is I make wine, I cook, I design labels. I like graphic design. I love music. So that's pretty much the bounds of my life.
Right, so I'm assuming now, since I was listening to what you said, that you prefer music to silence when you're writing.
Oh, definitely. I find it very hard to write in silence. Silence, I'm alone with my thoughts, and the silence becomes oppressive. I can't focus. I can't find anything in silence. But with music, for instance, for me, I know this isn't true of everybody, but for me, music helps close away the outside world. It forces the outside world away from me. and it creates an emotional space. I have playlists. I don't just listen to music, for instance, by the album or by the title or by the artist. Sometimes I create playlists that are specific to a mood. I create one that is chase music. I have one that is battle music. I have one that is sad, tragic music. I have thriller, suspense music. I have some that are designed to be, music for lighthearted moments. But I create these playlists that capture mood, and then to keep myself in the right headspace while I'm working on a particular type of scene, I listen to those playlists. And if I've choreographed action to a specific piece of music, when I'm in that scene, I will sometimes put that piece of music on a repeat, and I'll just work through the sequence bit by bit while listening to the music.
Is this music mostly instrumental, or
almost always? I cannot write while listening to music that has lyrics. Almost never. Again, I will sometimes listen to music with lyrics before I write, again, to find a mood. I'll find a playlist that captures a mood or a headspace I want to be in. But when it comes time to start writing and putting words on the page, I must have no lyrics. I only really write the instrumental music. Jazz without lyrics, I used a lot while writing the Star Trek Vanguard series. And movie soundtracks without lyrics are typically my go-to when I'm writing fiction.
Mm-hmm. So what does your writing space look like? Is there anything that you have to have with you when you're writing?
Usually a vodka and lemonade or limeade. Actually, I've got the limeade that I tend to mix with Stolichnaya orange. That tends to be what I need to have at my right hand. And then the other things I have going on, let's say, I really am not in a position to move things around without knocking everything off my desk. My desk is pretty spare. I try to keep it clean. I have basically my office is also the guest room. So right over here to my side is the guest bed. So the foot of the guest bed is my de facto second desk where I have some things lined up. If anybody comes to stay, I have to find places to put all this stuff away and clean all this up. But on my desk, like the little things that I keep, for inspiration, and I have my little bunny. And a friend of mine gave me a pencil holder that looks like a giant, well, to him, it looks like a giant typewriter. To me, it looks like a small typewriter. So I've got this thing. It's based on Hemingway's typewriter. What I do is I put the little bunny, and I put the bunny at the typewriter. So it looks like the bunny is typing at the giant typewriter. So that sits over here to my left. And then talking to the bunny while the bunny's doing that, on either side of the bunny, there's the little white bunny. That's the muse. Then there's the gerbil. That's his editor. The editor is saying write faster, and the muse is saying write better. So, and they live right over there.
So for drinks and food, you have your normal.
Sorry. For food, usually I write after dinner, so I don't usually have snacks. But if I do, my favorite writing fuel snack is the peanut butter filled pretzel.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's see. Yeah, writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them write through their work. And do you have any, and do they help or hinder you with your writing?
Neither. My wife and I do have furry companions. I've had cats pretty much my whole life. I grew up in a house with cats, and as soon as I had a home of my own, I pretty much had cats. I've had cats my whole life. Right now, my wife and I live with two cats who are wonderful. One is Winifred, also known as Freddie. She's my little evil princess, and I love her. And we have Wilbur, who my wife picked out at a shelter, and we both love Wilbur. Wilbur is a big, lovable, silly galoot, and he is a big, warm, fluffy, soft thing. But right now, they neither hinder me nor help me. I used to have a cat named Ripley who would sleep on the guest bed a few feet away from me while I worked, so she'd keep me company. But Winifred and Wilbur basically ignore me when I'm writing. I think they don't like the soundtrack music. I could be wrong, but they tend to retreat into the bedroom, the master bedroom. They tend to sleep about a foot away from each other or a few inches away from each other. I think they're in there now, snoozing. They'll come out and pester me they're like little alarm clocks. They know when it's 7 o'clock. They'll suddenly come prancing into my office and stare at me and say, dinner, the brochure clearly says that dinner is served at 7. And if it's not at 7, we're going to take a star off our Yelp review. So I suggest you get out of the chair, monkey, and come feed us. So they're very reliable on that.
Cats definitely do that.
At the very least, they keep me on schedule. They remind me what time it is.
Okay. How important has the New England setting been to your writing? And I'm assuming it probably has no importance whatsoever, since you're writing mostly about outer space.
Not a whole lot. Even though I grew up in New England, I'm a Massachusetts native. I grew up over in East Hampton, which is right off 91 near Holyoke.
Yeah.
I had never actually set a story in that area. I've never set a story in Massachusetts or Western Mass or really even New England at all. I've written one urban fantasy that involved a character from a small town in Pennsylvania. But again, that didn't really play into it. I think if anything, the only real influence that New England has had on my writing career is that having grown up there and having learned to think of Western Massachusetts and my hometown as the place where hope and dreams go to die, it made me motivated to get the hell out of there, so that when I turned 18, I moved to New York City, where I went to film school, and I have been here ever since. I've been in New York City for the last 34 years. So if New England was important in any single way, it was showing me where I had to get away from.
Okay.
Nothing against New England, it just wasn't for me.
All right, then I assume you're not going to be coming to visit us.
Probably not anytime soon. I was just up in the Massachusetts area last weekend visiting my father. My family still lives up there, so I come up to visit my family. But no, I mean, I'm a New York City boy. Apparently, I was always a New Yorker. It just took me 18 years to get here.
Okay. So I just have 2 more questions for you. Where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I'm going to just give a little plug, like I do at every single video, which is you can you can get all of David's books, and we can order David's books for you. And you can call us at 508-796-5613. Or you can send us email to orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else could people get your books?
Well, they can pretty much order them from any retailer that you would normally get books from, the big online retailers, Amazon, B&N. Your local bookstore should always be able to order them. Most of my books are available from major presses. Tor, which is part of Macmillan, Gallery or Pocket, which are both Simon & Schuster. I've had a few works published through small press, like short stories that are parts of anthologies, but even those should be readily available. And if you ever want to sort of see which links are available on which books, you can come to my website, davidmack.pro. That's David Mack, M-A-C-K, .pro. And you can go to the section called His Work, pull down to books or short fiction or comics, whatever you're interested in. If there's a link where you can buy it and it's still active, it's probably available from my website.
Okay, and how else can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
I don't know about awesomeness, but you can see what I'm up to or ranting about on Facebook on my author page, which tends to be more just about my work, what I have coming out, what I'm working on. That's facebook.com/TheDavidMack. And if you want to just sort of see my angry rantings as an unhinged New Yorker about politics or anything else, you can follow me on Twitter at David Allen, A-L-A-N, Mack. So it's David Allen Mack on Twitter.
Okay, well, thank you very much for coming, for joining me today. And I'm sure that that our viewers would love to see you. All right, thanks a lot. And
it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Okay, and hopefully we will see you eventually someday at
that would be very nice.
At our store. Okay, thank you.
I haven't been in Worcester since I bought that bass guitar at a Rush concert when I was 15. So it'd be nice to have a reason to come back.
Whoa, that's great. Okay, yes, definitely do that. Come and see us. Bye.